Hello again. Today I'm going to become one with the machine, eschewing my weak human flesh and replacing it with the cold, hard certainty of steel. Well, mostly andesite alloys, actually. Anyway, I'll be doing that by diving into Create, an absolutely incredible Minecraft mod that lets you build some really wild stuff, almost breaking into the territory of Factorio at times. I'm actually running the Mekanized pack today, which adds a number of things, but primarily the mod Mechanism. Though the focus here is very much learning Create. Okay? Okay. Let's get into it. We'll start by making some wooden tools, collecting some pork with them, and then checking out this giant crater that we spawned pretty much on top of. It's got what's presumably a meteor of obsidian at its center, surrounded by all sorts of interesting materials. Most useful to us right now, though, is coal. It's nice to stock up on that from the very beginning. The next morning, after a night of mining, because I didn't have 3 of the same colour wool for a bed, God forbid your sheets don't match the duvet, we find somewhere to settle down on the banks of a river in some beautiful green plains. Also, there's a puddle of lava here. It kind of spoils the vibe a little bit, but it'll be handy to have nearby. I decided that I would make the most iconically basic Minecraft house to start off, which involved gathering a load of clay for bricks and waiting for them to cook. A process which gave me some time to peep the quest system, which tutorializes some of the additions in this mod pack. There are a more structured set of quests to guide you through the whole mechanized side of things, and we'll get to that later, but for now I also want to get my first look at the ponder mechanic, an absolutely goated feature of Create, explaining and visualizing pretty much every feature of the mod. Very good. Okay, so building with bricks might have been more of a fuss than it was worth, but now we have minecrafthouse.jpg. And since I have a house, it's time to create. So I made a drill, and the ponder mechanic gives us some examples of how I could use it. But using it in any way at all will be difficult without the single most important item in Create, the wrench, which requires some gold to make, something I don't currently have. So, okay, fair enough, I guess we're going mining then. Near immediately upon digging into the ground next to my house, I'm discovering that things are a little bit different underground in modern Minecraft than the versions that I'm used to. Instead of digging through about 60 layers of plain boring stone to bedrock and then happily strip mining the entire universe, now there's a whole lot of underground water, among other things. At least there's still diamonds down here. You can't take that away from me, modern craft. But yeah, not super tolerable as far as mining environments go. I mean, to be fair, they're not usually super tolerable, as far as I understand. Anyway, whatever, I got some stuff, and then I got shot in the back with a crossbow by an angry Squidward on the way back to my home to smelt it. Not very nice. On my second trip underground, I sealed off my shaft from the water and continued mining, to find more water. But this water has gold in it, so that's nice. That's what I was here for. Rencho Constructo! Now I can turn things around, etc. Right, the reason I was building a drill is so that I could satisfy the first quest of Chapter 1 in the Mechanism tab, which is to make an automated cobble generator. So, water wheel spins, powers the drill, breaking the cobble. The cobble goes nowhere though, we'll get to that bit in a moment, but technically we've now automated something. So, there you go, I'd say we've mastered Create. See you next time, bye! Alright, fine, just kidding, we'll keep going. I got a bit confused here and thought that if I glued a chest to the drill, or at least a connected piece of machinery with superglue, then it would deposit the cobble that it mines directly into that chest. This isn't true in this case. It is true if the drill were part of a moving contraption, which I find to be a bit of a weird balance decision, but that's not relevant. The point is that I now got very distracted thinking that I needed to find some slime to make said glue. And luckily I saw that I could make said slime out of lime green dye and dough. So despite actually realizing that I could just catch the cobble in a hopper and deposit it into a chest that way, instead I embarked on a quest. A cactus quest. Before leaving, I made a small farm and planted some wheat so that I would have something to make dough out of when I get back, and then set out blindly in my little rectangular boat in search of cacti. I quickly got distracted by this weird nether thing, a nasty scar in the pleasant reality that we know and love. But hey, it's got loot, so it ain't so bad. There's also oil out here. I'm not sure if I can do much with that. I suspect it'd be useful for later game mechanism stuff, but I don't really know for sure. So I scooped up a bucket and went on my merry way, leaving what will turn out to be an entirely useless marker on the spout, because the black gold is all over the place out here. It's not exactly hard to find. My search for cacti led me to a jungle biome, in which I grabbed some bamboo and cocoa in case I ever want to do something with those later. And then I also found this weirdly generated village. Up on the cliffs, it's got a little bit crangled, but someone there had a compass, and by combining it with some logs and saplings, I can make a magical nature's compass, which lets me search out specific biomes. Apparently, the nearest desert is 5,000 blocks away. Huh. Well, okay then, so half an hour later, having travelled through a number of interesting biomes and stolen the entire GDP of a small boreal village, desert is finally visible on the map. And with it, there we go. Cactus Ho. This is what all of that voyaging was for. So after picking up a few, now I have to go home. It's not exactly monumental when the destination of your grand voyage is a few absolutely standard cacti. But to make the journey back a little bit more interesting, I headed south to take a different route home. And I was near immediately rewarded with a treasure map in a sunken ship, which shows a fairly distinctive landmass nearby. So after navigating to the X which marks the spot, and doing some digging, I got a chest full to the brim with goodies. Very good. Further along my journey, I also found what would make an absolutely incredible villainous lair. Who knows what horrors lie within. As I'm getting closer to home, I also find a sea dungeon, along with its, well, whatever those things are. They've inflicted me with mining fatigue. Alright, but I was just sailing by. Sorry, I guess. But shortly afterwards, we're home. So now I can make some more chests to try and organize all of this garbage that I've accumulated. And then I was planning at this point to try and make some kind of bone meal farm for white dye, assuming that superglue was a consumable item that I would need to mass produce, but you actually don't. It's a tool with durability. You really don't need to make it very often at all. However, I also discovered now that it turns out there's a much easier way to get both of the dyes that I need. By milling certain flowers. With a mill, predictably. So I made one of those and hooked it up to the same water wheels powering the cobble generator, gearing it up just a little so that it works faster. Oh, and then a wandering trader showed up. I actually really hate the snorting noises their llamas make. Nasty little things. Anyway, I used my magical compass to find a nearby flower meadow biome and absolutely annihilated the local ecosystem by pulling up all of the pretty little flowers, and then I took them home and fed them into my mill. Look at it go, turning white tulips into white dye, and at a much lower rate, also lime dye. Alright then, that just leaves the dough, which is made simply enough with the wheat that we planted earlier. Et voila! Super glue! Which, as I said earlier, before embarking on this multi-hour endeavour, doesn't actually do the thing I expected it to do, which was make this drill deposit its cobblestone into a chest. Anyway, I do need superglue quite a lot, so it's not a big deal, and we'll just use a hopper here to collect the cobble like we should have from the start. Right. It's not pretty, but it does put cobblestone into a box at a consistent rate. Unfortunately, it's consistently extremely slow, but it's better than nothing. The reason to do all of this automation work is because you can mill cobble down into gravel, and then extract other products from said gravel. Initially, flint and iron nuggets, but then you can use those to do other things. We'll get into that, but for now it's time to think about belts. No, not the kind your dad beat you with. Come on, get up, stop cowering in the corner. The kind that moves items from one place to another. They can also be used to transfer mechanical power, it turns out. It's very handy. They require a whole lot of kelp to make, and of course that's a farmable resource, but it's also simple enough to just go and grab a load for now. I'll worry about farming it later. I'm actually also running out of coal to cook stuff with. Also something that'd be simple enough to farm if you think about it. Also something I'll worry about later. Back at the world's worst gravel factory, the setup I've got is that the cobble is hoppered into a chest, and then funneled out of that chest into a second mill, and then the resulting gravel is funneled out, just onto the floor. Look, I doubt Henry Ford's first engineering prototype was pretty. This is surprisingly complicated stuff for a Minecraft mod, but I do feel my brain getting wrinklier as I play. I can see the available depths of complexity, waiting to be plumbed. So now I want to make a drill of some sorts, to plumb those depths, I guess. There's a simple machine called a rope pulley that'll raise or lower a contraption using mechanical power. So it's only natural that my brain immediately jumps to, stick drills to it. It's just how I am. It's a sickness really, but it's gotten me this far. So I did that, and look at it go. Down into the immediate underground pools that apparently occupy 90% of the world in modern craft. I realized then that if I wanted it to come back, I would need some redstone for a gear shift. A block that'll reverse the direction of its mechanical output when given a redstone signal. So that means digging deeper. Manually, I mean. These ideas of mechanical drills are great for mass harvesting stone and such, but realistically for actual material harvesting, without setting something really interesting up, and we'll try that later, you're probably better off just mining for yourself a lot of the time. So anyway, I got my redstone along with a load of other shiny rocks, and after a little crafting, bada bing, bada gear shift, the drill on a rope goes up and down at my behest. Very good. I'm starting to want brass for a few things now. You need quite a bit of it for basically anything more advanced than a drill on a rope. If you want to filter items in transit, for example, you're going to need brass to make fancier tunnels, funnels, and chutes. Okay, that's a simple enough problem to solve, you might think. But surprisingly, in Create, you can't just make brass in a stone oven. You have to mix copper and zinc in a basin, heated from below by something called a blaze burner. Therefore, nether portal. Wait, no, not yet. How do I actually make the thing that holds the blazes? This is a process that involves some machinery. I have to make something called a basic mechanism by having deployers use cogwheels on an iron plate and then smash it flat with a press. Then you combine those with some netherrack on a smithing table to make the empty blaze burner itself. Okay, now therefore nether portal. Where through the portal, under some duress, I managed to establish a beachhead of sorts. A small, safe-ish zone made of dirt. I mark my portal location this time because I'm not repeating the mistake I made in Hexit, and whilst the map's open, look at that. How very lucky, we spawned right next to a fortress. This makes the process of grabbing a pair of blazes from a conveniently located spawner, well, convenient. So now then, like I said, back in the real world I can set up a basin over one of those hot boys, feed him something flammable and then mix up zinc and copper into brass, thus opening the door to the Brass Age, with all of its handy machines. Before we use any of them though, looking at more of the mechanism quests, I see that I'm going to want to automate a lava farm, which is done in the usual manner with dripstone, but with Create you can suck the lava straight out of the cauldrons and store it in tanks. Notice how I said that like I know what I'm talking about. Well, I don't. Do I look like I know what a dripstone is? I'm sure I saw some of it somewhere on my travels, but I cannot for the life of me remember where. So thankfully then I still have that magical compass, and Dripstone Caverns is a discrete biome that I can just search for. So about 10 minutes and some caving later, I've found some. Not much, but some. And you can actually farm the stuff, so it's fine to only start with a little. I wasn't 100% sure about that, so when I got home I set up a little test pillar to see whether or not it'll grow, and then used the rest to set up a very small lava farm. I do a lot of very small scale builds in this playthrough because I'm learning the basics, picking up nuggets of knowledge that I can apply to larger scale projects later on. So anyway, this is my first time playing with the fluid dynamics of Create, and they're pretty simple. You just connect things with copper pipes and power a pump pointing into where you want the liquid. This lava farm with just 3 cauldrons works very slowly, but I did eventually verify that it does indeed work. And then verified that the pump does indeed do its job too, taking from the filled cauldron and into the tank. With that working away, I spent the next little while beautifying my workspace, and starting to experiment with automated farming, starting with trying to make a basic tree farm. My early experiments were not going well. My other experiment, on the other hand, is going swimmingly. I made a baby dripstone spike. Look at it, so cute. But back to tree farming. I managed to make a spinning contraption that only eats itself or picks up the ground some of the time, and then used a pair of deployers to place saplings for it to cut. And of course I could then grab from that contraption's inventory to feed the deployers with saplings, but that would require something called rose quartz for filtering, and I'm not quite ready to get to that yet. But wait, I actually have a couple of brass funnels from quest rewards, and after something went hideously wrong, I noticed that just by dropping saplings out of a funnel, they appear to get planted. Huh. Neuron activation. But instead of following that newly grown thread of brain cells, I fixed the problem that is actually not a problem, but rather a more efficient version of the thing I'm building, and made a portable storage interface so that I could properly pull saplings out of the spinning contraption and feed them into that one deployer from belts. I even then thought about automating bone meal to feed onto the singular sapling with another deployer, but thankfully I didn't go down that road. There will be at least 3 of you watching this and saying, "That is an awful way to automate a tree farm, you dunce." There will be a lot more than 3 of you yelling that general sentiment, but I'd guess only about 3 will use the word dunce specifically. And look, I know, I did step back from this after making it and ask, wait, why did I even make it rotating if it's only harvesting one static tree? And I'll make something far more normal for mass wood automation later, but I was quite strict about figuring things out, at least for the first iteration, entirely by myself, which tends to result in some inefficient abominations. And I think that's kind of nice, because they're my inefficient abominations. So, moving on, I made some goggles. I should have really made these earlier. They let you see a lot of handy numbers, like exactly how much stress a machine is causing its connected power generation. So I never really talked about how exactly the power system works in Create because I assume most of you already know. But essentially each generator, like the water wheels that I've been using almost exclusively so far, generate a number of stress units, and a machine uses a set number of stress units to run, usually multiplied by the speed that it's running at. So you can gear up a drill to work faster, but it will cause more stress on your generation. It's a neat concept. For now, I've been powering basically every machine I made with its own discrete generators, but later on I'll use much more centralized power generation. Anyway, let's make some actual progress then. In a building this time, perhaps, instead of just throwing stuff around in the grass and mud. Before I actually start building anything though, I decided that I'd want to use lamps in here to move on from the torch age. So a quick jaunt through the nether later, glowstone acquired and lamps inlaid into a somewhat interesting patterned floor. There's not much point making a pattern like this for a factory because it's all intended to be covered up by machinery anyway, but oh well, I've done it now, haven't I? I have been making some use of the building wands in the mod pack so far, but it's only now when I figure out how to actually operate them properly, accessing their various modes that let me build up the walls of this building much faster. So after a little while working at it, honestly this thing is hideous. It's just a giant stone and wood lump with some oddly positioned, nasty looking green glass windows. Yeah, I really don't love it, but whatever, I'm just going to say that it's functional design or something. I didn't even build it a roof, but the point is just for it to house a decently sized system of generating and milling down cobble into iron nuggets and flint for later crafting into andesite. I get started crafting the required machinery for that and immediately I run out of iron, which is after all the whole point of building this, to improve that very situation. So I have to go underground again for a while to fetch some, and when I come back up it's time for a spike maxing update. The stalagmite has gotten bigger, would you look at that? Very good. Back in the factory I have 7 cobble generators running now, and I'm moving on to the method for extracting the stone onto belts. I'm just having them all drop onto individual diagonal belts and then passing them onto a main belt for further processing. There is a more efficient way to do it, but it works and it fits the space nicely. If you care about the output figures, I counted about 24 cobblestone in a 10-second window, so it's something like 144 per minute. More than enough. In fact, when we move on to the milling step, we'll find out that it's far, far more than enough. Before we can do that, though, I can't avoid rose quartz any longer. It's been stalking me down the halls this whole time, and now it's here to get me. I need it to make my own brass tunnels and funnels. Specifically, I'm after the tunnels so that I can split a single belt out into many, and then use filtering to hold items on those belts still for washing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Rose quartz is made by squirting some destabilized redstone onto nether quartz and then sanding it smooth. It's simple enough really, I just grab one of the blaze burners and mix up some redstone in a basin over it. I'm powering this with a water wheel under the floor, same for the cobble generators by the way. Like I said, I'll move on to more centralized power later, but for now you can assume that anything I build has a water wheel underneath it. Right, anyway, we've got destabilized redstone in a tank, so now we can pump it into a spout, which is used to dribble fluids onto items. There you go then. Rose quartz. Now just to sand it. Sandpaper is made of, surprise surprise, paper and sand. So luckily I made sure to grow plenty of sugarcane from the start since I assumed that I would need it, and there's a nice sandy beach nearby. You can of course automate the sanding, but for the amounts of rose quartz that I need right now, it's easy enough to just do it by hand so that I can progress on the main project, which is using the rose quartz to make brass tunnels that split the cobble into a load of mills. And you might ask the question, why are you consolidating all of the cobble generators onto one belt and then splitting it back out again onto multiple for milling? And the answer is that I have no idea what the working time of anything is, so I have no idea what an ideal ratio of generators to mills would be, so by consolidating the outputs of the generators I can more easily adjust either side of the equation if it's held up on either side later. Will I actually make those adjustments later? No. But could I? Yes. Anyway, check out the spike maxing. Look at these bad boys! Alright, back to work. I've set up 8 mills and started feeding cobble into them, after which they'll be dumped onto a belt for washing, a process that involves running a fan through water and onto the items being processed. These two processes together are going to require quite a substantial new generator. So out back of the factory I built a bank of large water wheels, which generate twice as many stress units as their smaller brothers but at half the speed, so I then have to gear up their output before feeding it back into the factory. And you can see I didn't quite get it going fast enough here as the fan's range is missing the last couple of mills. Also it's sucking air instead of blowing, so that's a problem, but it's easy enough to solve. So I expanded the generator and ramped up the speed even more, and there we go. The washing is now going far enough, but I need to hold the gravel in place whilst it's washed. I thought I would be able to do this by filtering one tunnel at the end of the belt to only let flint and iron nuggets pass through. But that functionally only lets a single mill work because the processed materials can't pass through the waiting gravel on the belt. Therefore, every single mill needed its own belt and tunnel, with all of their outputs blocking gravel from entering, and then I can just have all but one output blocked off on the other side, with the open one filtering for the processed materials. So there you go. This machine now generates an infinite supply of flint and iron nuggets, which for now we'll store in this chest, and later process further. I let it just run for a while so I could build up some iron to make other things with, because at this point I started doing some extracurricular learning. Read watching other people's gameplay and realizing a few of my mistakes in the process. First things first, I would like to make a chunk-wide drilling machine using the same concept as that rope drill I made earlier, but this time mounted on a gantry system so that it can cover a wider area without requiring insane amounts of mechanical power. I mainly want this to build up a massive supply of andesite, but of course all of the other stuff it'll dig up could be handy too. I won't cover its construction in too much detail because it's a fairly standard contraption that many others have made before me, but here I am demonstrating its operation with a hand crank. By default, when given power, the contraption will move along the gantry, and then when you give a redstone signal to the gantry, it will transmit that power to the rope pulley instead, letting you move the drills up and down. I've covered it with barrels to store all of its goodies, and now I just need to build a fairly sizable generator for it. And then I need to get to grips with controlling it. Now that it's moving substantially faster, that's quite tough. It's especially janky when done with a pair of levers like this. One to reverse the direction with a gear shift and the other to switch between gantry and pulley control. If I had a degree in being a virgin... Sorry, that was a bit rude. If I had a degree in redstoneology... Same thing. I expect I could set up a control system that would be much more elegant than this. I actually sort of can visualize how it would work. Buttons with pulse extenders that correspond to the amount of ticks required for the gantry to move one block, sending signals of the correct duration to move it over one block left or right and then stop again. But I'm going to be real with you. I ain't doing all of that for a machine that's realistically just going to produce a few thousand cobble and deep slate and not much else. Hopefully, whilst I was talking myself down that rabbit hole, you enjoyed watching the machine start its journey down to bedrock. Again, it sucks that there's so much water to get in the way down there, but oh well. Next, I want to make an automated crop farm. I'm thinking carrots, since you can make golden carrots with them. So I set up a little platform next to the house and once again used a gantry to move a contraption covered in harvesters back and forth along it. But right now I'm doing that with a lever on a gear shift, which, as you might have noticed, isn't automatic because my hand is involved. That's what we call in the industry manual. We call that manual. So I set up an observer to send a pulse back to the gantry when it reaches the far end, and used a pulse extender to make that pulse long enough to pull it all the way back to the start of the track. And it only ate itself a few times before I finally got it running cleanly. Oh, and look who's back with his disgusting phlegmy pack animals. I'm gonna be honest with you, I just killed him in cold blood. I just can't stand him being around. But never mind that. Look at my Farmotron go. Slowly filling itself with carrots. Shrek will have turned orange by the end of this video if that's all he eats. Damn, that was a huge missed opportunity to steadily shift the hue of my skin towards orange as I recorded this video. Oh well. Let's check in with the miner's progress. I've been managing it whenever I remembered to whilst building the farm, and it's gotten a few rows down to bedrock now. Next on my list is a kelp farm. This should be pretty simple to make. Plant kelp underwater and it will slowly grow upwards. So the obvious choice is just to build a water tank, plant a load of kelp in it, and then stick a rotating saw at the top to trim any kelp that grows into its path. So that's what I did. And this is the first machine I've used a windmill for. Since I don't need this to move particularly quickly and the axis of mechanical power needs to be vertical anyway, it just seemed like the most obvious choice for this application. Nice. I'm starting to feel like a real engineer now, throwing practical and relatively efficient machines together one after another. And whilst heading to bed, feeling all triumphant and ready for my evening shoulder workout, I saw it. The tips. They've joined. It's beautiful. But we can't stare at it all night, because now as I was pondering my irritating lack of coal and my growing stock of raw materials from all of the drilling I've been doing, I figured it's time to build a smeltery of some sort. Because why process ores in a furnace with coal when you can just blow air through lava and melt stuff down that way instead? So I need another building, and I want to actually make something a bit pretty and thematic this time, unlike the hideous, unroofed lump I made earlier. So I picked out deep slate and granite from the drills as a nice color combo and set to work with my magic wand. Layer by layer I built this thing, which currently doesn't have a roof, but it looks like it would fit in alongside a canal in one of Britain's early industrial cities or something like that. So about that roof, I decided to build it out of copper because I believe that'll oxidize over time and turn a nice shade of green, which should both contrast nicely with the walls and also serve as a quaint way to mark the passing of time as the playthrough goes on. I finished it off with a combination of lamps in the floors and hanging from the ceiling by chains. For some reason this corner is being a bit glitchy, but there you go. I made something that I'm actually happy with aesthetically. Very good. Now to actually utilize it. What I want in here is a few input and output chests for different material processing lines. But first I'm going to need a generator to power all the fans, belts and whatnot. So I decided that now is the time to look at steam engines. Probably just because the building has a steampunky vibe to it, to be honest. Steam engines in Create are, I think, a lot less complicated than they seem. I don't think you ever strictly need to make one to get through the game and even to build some really wild stuff, because you can always just add more windmills or water wheels to a system. But I like the idea of this a lot more. The basic premise is that you build a big copper tank, pump in water, heat it up, and, well, that's it. It makes rotational force with pistons. I got this very small one running off of passive heat using magma blocks and a water pump powered by a water wheel, but to make an amount of stress units that's worth setting up a steam engine for, really you want to be actively heating it, because as you can see, a tank of this size could support far more heat energy than it's being given by passive heating, which will always be level 1 on the heat scale like this. With those two engines, it's currently making 2048 stress units, which is the same amount as 4 large water wheels. So I'll be switching it over to blaze burners, and this is where things get a little bit more complicated. Blaze burners aren't just free energy. I didn't mention it when I've used them before, but you do actually have to feed them flammable stuff. You have a few options here. You could make a tree farm and turn the wood into charcoal, but the most commonly used source for a steam engine is a lava farm. As a lava bucket will run a blaze burner for a few minutes, so you don't need a huge lava farm to run them. Actually feeding them with the lava though will require something new for us. I'm going to use a mechanical arm, a very powerful device that requires some fairly advanced crafting. Before I do that though, it's time to harvest our child, for which I get what I deserve, skewered by my own son. Anyway, time to quickly churn out this mechanical arm. It's something that would be complicated to automate at scale, but to just churn one out isn't quite so serious. I just have to make a brass casing and then manually operate a deployer and a mechanical press on a brass plate to make a precision mechanism. Add some other bits to it on a crafting bench and ta-da! Mechanical arm. To use that at the steam engine is simple. You take a pipe from a lava farm, spout it into a bucket which can be picked up by the mechanical arm, who then feeds it to the blaze burner and, crucially, puts the bucket back to be refilled. It's neat. Mechanical arms seem like a fairly easy solution to almost any logistical problem in Create because of how widely programmable they are. So I sat for a while and verified that this very small lava farm would make enough to reliably feed the burners here, and it seems like they will. So there we go. Steam power. 32,000 stress units of it, with far more capacity for heat energy to increase that value later if needed. I have seriously overestimated the requirements of this building, but it's okay because this engine is going to be that centralized power that I've been banging on about for the whole video so far. I'll be pulling power from this thing for everything else that I build. Now then, time to actually build all of the stuff inside of the smeltery. I figured that I need about 9 lanes for sorting raw ores, based on poking around all of my raw material storage. There's probably more realistically, but it wouldn't be hard to add more capacity to this system later. This system, being a funnel pulling ore out of an input chest and belting it into a system of tunnels that sort it out into each ore type, and then into another set of tunnels that will only accept the processed metals, so that the ores will be held in place on the belts for hot air processing. And then they're fed back into an output chest. It's actually very simple. And after powering it up and sorting out all of the filtering, I can verify that it works. So now I just need to feed it industrial quantities of ore. Alright, now that the drills have cleared a chunk-sized shaft all the way down to bedrock, let's build an elevator then. I have a roughly 2-hour long recording of me failing at this, trying to use a rope pulley for an elevator, using redstone receivers and latches to toggle the controls of the pulley from either end of the... Anyway, you get the point, it didn't work. But at least I've cleared a dry shaft down to bedrock in the process. So after coming back the next day and trying again with the aptly named elevator pulley, this build went much more smoothly. It's not the most beautiful elevator you've ever seen in Minecraft, but it is mine. It goes up and it goes down and can be called to either up or down from either down or up. The remainder of my gameplay now is me swapping back and forth between following the Chapter 1 Mekanized quests, which focus on automating andesite casings, and just messing around with new and shiny machinery. Starting with quests. But immediately I realize I'm going to need way more dripstone to chase that particular dragon, and so I convert my original, now defunct lava farm to a completely non-functional and also very small dripstone farm, because I didn't know at the time that the dripstone spike needed to be placed on a dripstone block in order to make more dripstone. So whilst I was waiting for that dripstone farm to not work, I spent some time up top building a minecart-based mining machine, that should in theory be able to pilot itself down an endless shaft of its own creation, stacking up an endless supply of materials. But when I tried to place it down in the mines, things weren't going very well. So I ended up just completely rebuilding it. Essentially, it's just a minecart with a load of drills attached to the front, plenty of chests for storing their output, and then a combination of a deployer and a plow to place powered rails in front of the cart and then remove them again behind it. It's kind of like that one Wallace and Gromit scene where they're placing the rails in front of the train as they go. And sure enough, off it goes, mining away into the distance. I could ride it, but inevitably it hits lava near immediately, so that wouldn't end well. My simulation distance is set to 32 chunks, so I guess I'll just have to check back in on it shortly. And shortly is now. I've let it run for a while, and now I have to catch up to it and scoop it up with my wrench. Because, yeah, you can just pick up entire minecart contraptions and hold them and their entire storage capacity in a single inventory space. It's really completely insanely overpowered if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, but anyway, this kind of machine is a fun demonstration of what Create can do. A technically infinite mining machine that will just run forever and ever and ever, providing you with an endless supply of materials. But it's not actually very useful. I mean, you have to chase it down its own shaft and catch it like a scorned mole to retrieve any of the resources it collects, and then if you want to automate the resource drop-off to feed into a, for example, smeltery, you'd have to line it up into a depot of some sort where it can connect to a portable storage interface. It just doesn't really work very well in practice as a resource collection machine, but rather as a simple shaft-digging robot. I suppose that's my point. There's probably a very well-refined version of the same contraption that actually does some really great stuff, and by all means, let me know about that in the comments. I am surprisingly open to learning. At this point though, I actually went into creative mode to experiment with some other resource-gathering contraptions, up to and including a version of this minecart contraption, but on a controllable train, so you can drive it manually or even remotely call it back to a station for drop-off. That makes a lot more sense than using the minecart solution if you ask me, but it is very expensive to make rails and locomotives and such. Anyway, ultimately, I think the best solution is, as usual, the simplest. An extendable piston covered in drills is extremely quick to set up, very simple to operate, and most importantly, it forces you to subscribe to the channel, doesn't it, James? So that was a somewhat productive experimentation session. Let's now go back to the real world and fail to apply anything we've learned. Instead, because I've been frustrated about a lack of belts, I'll automate the cooking of kelp. This is done by blowing air through a fire rather than lava like for smelting, and I'm just using a chest to input raw kelp at the moment instead of automatically pulling it over from the farm, even though that's right next door, because that's just who I am and it's unlikely to ever change. Great. Next on my list is to make a better tree farm. My original one has actually been serving as a pretty good reminder that there's usually no need to overdo it in Minecraft, because even though it's a pathetic, sad excuse for a tree farm, it's been keeping me rather well supplied with wood, actually. Nonetheless, I made a larger one, hooked it up to the steam power, and oh, Jesus Christmas, that's terrifying! It's a little bit fast. Might be wise to build a fence around that for safety and maybe gear it down a little, because at this speed I think it often actually phases through trees without even cutting them. But even at a slightly lower speed, it still quite effectively murders zombies, so that's fun. It does another weird thing, actually. I loaded into the game the next morning and found it covered in leaves, so now it looks like a strange rotating hedge, but whatever. The plan now is to siphon out some logs into the smeltery and turn them into charcoal, so that I never need to worry about coal again. My design for this isn't perfect. The input chests will eventually fill with sticks and apples, so I would need to come up with some kind of solution to automatically trash the overflow, which I think would actually be quite simple, but that's the kind of problem that I like to solve when it actually becomes one rather than before. So now let's move back to the automation of andesite. I ran power from the steam engines over to the old growth factory to fuel this project, which involves the compressing together of flint, gravel, and lava. I quite quickly ran into space issues here. Trying to get 2 solid ingredients and 1 liquid into a basin, and then pulling out a solid ingredient turns out to actually be quite complicated. Unless... Yep, Mechanical arm to the rescue. I told you it would be a simple solution in times of need. So it's very ugly, and it's currently being rained on, but that is technically automated andesite. It's also very slow, but the holdup there is mainly the lava. I don't have enough dripstone to expand the lava farm that's fueling it, and this is when I remembered that non-functional dripstone farm I set up a few hours ago. So the next day of recording was spent pretty much entirely farming dripstone. I just slowly expanded the original spike maxing pillar bit by bit, and let it run whilst I got some other stuff done, so the majority of the farming wasn't actually recorded, but this is what we've ended up with. A healthy amount of dripstone to farm lava with, and a much larger setup for farming more of it. Using some of my new supply, I figure that I should actually automate this process. So I set up a machine that's essentially identical to the carrot farmer, but instead of harvesting crops, it drills any dripstone that has the chutzpah to grow. But whilst working on that, I noticed that the tree farm was just spitting stuff all over the floor because, as I said they would, the chests had all filled up. I talked about setting up a system to automatically trash the excess, but a perhaps more efficient and also much easier solution is to monitor the charcoal chest and simply tell the tree farm to stop running whenever it's full. Which, once I finally figure out how these threshold switches work, is quite simple, and it does indeed work, as I'll now demonstrate. Chest's full, machine stops. Chest not full, machine goes. Very good. So now back to dripstone. Like I said, it's super simple, it's just drills on a gantry going back and forth underneath some dripstone, and if anything grows, it gets drilled. Like that one hanging there just did. I'm glad I caught it working because, as you can imagine, its output is incredibly sporadic. So with that working away in the background, it's back into the lump we go to finish off the andesite saga. With an infinite supply of andesite blocks and iron nuggets, we can mix those together in a basin to make andesite alloy more efficiently than the handcrafted recipe. I'll spare you the exact details of the construction here because, as you can see, things are getting extremely messy and this video is already quite long, but obviously it's really fairly simple. I just made it look a lot less simple in my own special way. The next step would be to automate the turning of those alloys into andesite casings, but I think I get it now. I feel like if I can describe something that I need, I can probably just about find a way to make it work. But I also feel like I would rather not keep doing that in this shambolic mess of a factory. So, I'll be back, Create, and next time I'll be arriving pre-equipped with knowledge and experience. Leave your favourite Create mod packs in the comments and maybe I'll play that next. Ideally to completion this time. Because I realise it was weird to play the Mekanized pack and barely even leave the kiddie pool like this, but honestly it was just nice to have some supporting mods and the structure of a quest line to guide me through the basics. So if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to see more. It helps a lot. But whatever you do, please remain indoors. The angry ghost of a wandering trader is out there, and his ghostly llamas keep making gross throat noises. Ugh. So until next time, goodbye.